Your alternative talk radio contact. The Planet. KGRAradio.com.
With infinite complacence, people went to and fro the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Welcome to another episode of Into the Fray, leering at you from the woodline. Visit the mothership at intothefrayradio.com. There you can find all the episodes, the blog posts, ITF gear, and sign up for the free guest newsletter. The weekly show is, of course, always free and available in all podcatchers, but if you'd like to support the show, and why wouldn't you, go to the website and click Become an Insider, which in turn gets you extra content each and every month. And by the way, if you would be so kind as to leave a rating and review in your listening platform of choice, Cosmic Karma shall be yours. Be part of the discussion by joining the interactive ITF Facebook group, follow on Twitter at ITF_radio and Instagram. If you have an experience that you'd like to share, email Shannon at intothefrayradio.com or call the hotline anytime at 844-866-3366. Thanks so much for listening. Now, if you would be so kind, buckle up your safety belts. Put that tray table in the upright position. Liftoff is upon us.
So on this edition of Into the Fray, I have on with me Laura Hagelin, and she has produced the documentary titled Unseen. And this is all about Anthony Sowell, which a lot of people might know him better as the Cleveland Strangler. And listeners to this show know that I have already done an episode on Anthony Sowell, aka the Cleveland Strangler, but there was a reason that I wanted to talk to Laura after I watched the documentary, and that is because there was some things in there I hadn't heard before, some extra details, some very disturbing things that came forth in the documentary. Yeah, I wanted to touch on that again. So, Laura, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So, I mean, why serial killers? Why, and specifically, why Anthony Sowell? Is that because you're in the Cleveland area? That was such a big story. It was, of course, I'm sure, making headlines across the country, but is that because it was a local story, so it maybe impacted you more?
Yes. I'd always heard about serial killers, but it was something really kind of foreign to my existence, and I've never had I guess I've had the usual morbid interest in that kind of topic, but from a documentary standpoint, that was never anything I thought I would ever get involved in. But yes, I do live in Cleveland, and I lived about 10 minutes from where the bodies were discovered,
yeah.
And it was kind of just impossible to stay away from it. Even then, though, it took at least, several weeks of trying to convince myself to actually do a project about it, because I just wasn't sure what I, as a person, a filmmaker, would have to contribute.
Yeah, and I'm sure this will come up a lot more later, especially when we talk about some of the survivors that you actually got to sit down and talk to, which I can't imagine the emotion in that room in that time with you guys. But going into it and then at the culmination, was it what you were expecting as far as how you personally felt about it?
It was really, the anxiety mostly came before the interviews because, I had some idea, since I'd been to the trial, I had some idea of, what these women had been through. So it was anxiety producing, and that the idea of sort of making them relive all of this pain was just an awful idea, to put someone through that again. But then also I realized, well, it's necessary for the film. It's like I have to kind of not only have them tell me what happened, but actually kind of slow time down, get them to relive every detail. So that was nerve-wracking. I guess once the interview began, I was kind of more in, I guess you'd say, sort of a driver's seat. It's more like, or if you're navigating an airplane, you don't want to be emotional. You kind of have to detach yourself. So that's kind of how I got through things.
That's interesting. I guess because I did watch the documentary, of course. I wasn't sure where you had gotten that footage from the trial with like Vanessa Gay up on the stand and her retelling that also, besides just the interview that you did. So you were present for that. That is very interesting.
Yeah, I was there. I had to get permission to get a feed from all the news channels. So I wasn't actually filming. We were all just kind of jammed into this little media room. But it was for about a 2-month period of time. And that very powerful interview you're talking about just kind of stunned everybody because nobody had met Vanessa before, heard about her. Some of the women had come forward to the news media, but this one woman in particular had not, and just everybody was stunned hearing her testimony for the first time.
Yeah, what she saw in that house prior to her getting out was, it's hard to even imagine going through something like that, and we'll touch on that, of course. Well, let's talk a little bit about Anthony, who a lot of people called Tone, right, as a nickname, about a little bit of his background and him growing up, and even you had his stepsister, right, in the film, and she even admitted, Anthony was a little off, even as a kid.
Right, and I would say his sister was maybe sugarcoating things a bit. There were others. I'm sure if you read Bob's book, there were some real nightmarish stories about how he attacked some of his step-siblings, and she actually had a more positive view of him in the film.
And it was a nice dichotomy between Robert Sperrin's book, and that's who I interviewed initially all those episodes ago about this, and then between your documentary, because there was different points brought up in each item. And one of the worst things out of his book, besides obviously the actual acts and Anthony actually doing these things when he was older, was the fact that he was watching, I think, his grandmother strip down his cousins or niece, or I think it was his cousins, possibly, in the house, and she was stripping them down and beating them while they were naked.
Right.
And they were a little too old to be naked in front of other children like that. And then I think he was actually raping one of his cousins at some point in their life.
I was such a huge family. I'll be honest with you, I've sort of forgotten.
Yeah, I know. No, me too. It's hard to remember all the details. Yeah. But I guess the broad stroke was that he, I guess you can always blame it on somebody else, right? Parents or grandparents or whoever, foster parents, which wasn't in his case, but it's, you try to point those fingers and find the threads that create these monsters, basically. But he sounds to have, kind of what we call a very hard childhood. And it definitely seemed to transfer into his adulthood, obviously. I remember, I think, also from Robert's book, him saying that when he was actually in the military, he did wonderful in the military. He was, very, he basically liked structure. And then once that was over, he seemed to kind of fall apart, right?
Yeah, right. Didn't know what to do with himself, got involved with drugs. Yeah, that is. Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. And, you know, you can always look at, well, what causes a serial killer, but then, you know, you see some of his siblings that were, you know, really lived in the same violent household.
Right.
Maybe they were emotionally damaged, but then again, they didn't go around killing people. So.
Yeah. I think that's the exact thing that Robert had said at one point during our interview. He's like, well, yeah, but, you know, not everybody decides they need to murder 11 people and,
right.
you know, bury them in various places in their house in stages of decomposition. So can't always point the finger elsewhere. If we could touch on really quickly, because this is something that in the story is so astounding, that in 1989, he actually raped a woman at knife point. She did report it, and he went to prison for something up to, 15 years or something. But then, yeah, wasn't he released under some kind of a low grade, recidivism rate, and he wasn't even flagged as someone to watch out for?
Yeah, I mean, this is the irony. He refused to participate in any of the the programs they have for sexual offenders, which are designed so that you're less likely to offend. And he wouldn't participate because he would not admit that he had a problem. So because of that, the person evaluating him said he was of low risk to reoffend because he wasn't really a sexual predator. He didn't describe himself as such. So, I mean, that just sounds kind of ridiculous and unfathomable, but that is exactly what happened.
I had a chance to go to Fox Hollow Farm in Indiana, where Herb Baumeister killed young men and buried him in his backyard, and that sounds all very, like this case. They bring him back to the house. Something that I didn't even find out till later after I had gone there. Someone sent me a YouTube clip of Herb Baumeister. He was on the front part of his property, and he was on the news, and the news was interviewing him because he had called them because he was outraged because now the raccoon was already dead, but the men that paint the stripes on the road had painted over the dead raccoon as part of the stripe, and he was outraged. Meanwhile, he's only yards of human bodies that he had taken off the planet, right, away from their loved ones and families, and buried them. The disconnect there is just amazing. And what you said about how he would never really admit that he had a problem and he wouldn't go to those programs is also from your documentary. He would actually stick up for the female corrections officers when he saw that they were being mistreated.
Right. Yeah, he was quite the gentleman.
It's
and
unreal.
That's also how the corner store owner described him. He was kind of impressed by his manners and, thought he was a high-class guy.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a lot of contradictions. But, I mean, I think you'll see that throughout history that, there are serial killers that seem like, the perfect person or the perfect gentleman, and yet there's something missing from their eyes, or, it could be part of the facade that they put on.
Do you think that, going through all this time to do the documentary and studying Anthony so in depth for so long, do you really think that he has some kind of a mental breakdown there, that he really believes that, I remember in your documentary, basically during the police interviews, him saying, well, I remember having dreams about possibly killing someone, there's always kind of this dancing around the subject. Do you think he really believes that he didn't do these things?
I think he was putting on an act there.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was just trying to confuse them, act as if he was insane. I think actually he was much smarter than that. I think he knew exactly what he was doing. because if you hear him later on testifying, or actually Robert recorded some conversations with him in jail, and he sounds pretty normal.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like he's running around in some kind of fog, or so yeah. I think that was really just all an act.
Well, let's if people aren't familiar with this, if you could kind of paint Anthony's MO. Like once, I remember, is it Assad Taya saying that he was pretty cool for like 2 years, right? Like you said, like he was a gentleman,
Right.
he's well-spoken, and then things started to change. So if we could just kind of paint a picture as to what he was doing and how he was kind of, he was getting these women, these specific type of women back to his house to prey upon. And then we'll kind of get into some of the specifics of what some of these ladies went through.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not really an expert on Sowell because I did focus more on the victims. But
Yeah.
From what I know, in the beginning, after he was released from prison, he had a full-time job, and he was going to work every day, and he was, I guess, fairly normal, getting a paycheck, keeping it together, and then from what I know is that he started dating, actually, Lori Frazier, who was the mayor's niece, of all things. And she, at the time, was a crack addict, and he was trying to actually get her clean. And then when she got clean, I guess she decided to break up with him. And that, according to him, is what caused his downward spiral, or that he started. It's either that or he started at some point during the relationship also smoking crack, and that could be when things really turned. It's hard to know. I mean, and there's a lot of question because apparently she was living in the house while he was killing some of these women, and there would have been the odor in the house, the bodies, and so a lot of people are always speculating. How much did she know? Of course, she claims she didn't know anything about it. But, somewhere, I don't know, I guess about 2 years. He was released in 2005. So, somewhere around 2007 or so, I guess, is when he started killing the women and things really shifted. That's at least what we know.
Right. Yeah, because he would actually be so friendly to everybody that I think it was Vanessa said that he had come up to her and said, "Hey, do you want to come back to my house and have some drinks or whatever?" And that there was people outside like waving to him and, hey, Tone, how's it going, man? How's your day going? And she said that he seemed so well liked that she went back to his house with him.
Yeah, I mean, I think by all accounts he seemed pretty unthreatening and friendly, and a lot of the neighbors, he'd help some of the elderly neighbors with a plumbing problem or whatever, and also, ironically, lived next door to a sausage factory. This was a family-owned business, and I guess they had some siding stolen from their business, some aluminum or some... aluminum siding, and he said, I'll keep an eye out for you. And then, of course, later they found that he was the one who stole it. So, but people just thought he was kind of the reliable guy. And again, this is in an area where, there's a lot of crime and there's a lot of drug use and drug dealing, and people just saw him as kind of the solid guy.
Well, Laura, let's take a quick break with a word from our sponsor. Are you hiring? Posting your position to job sites and endlessly waiting for the right people to see it? Well, ZipRecruiter learns what you're looking for, identifies people with the right experience, and invites them to apply to your job. These innovations have revolutionized how you find your next hire. In fact, 80% of employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site in just one day. And ZipRecruiter doesn't stop there. They even spotlight the strongest applications you receive so you never miss a great match. The right candidates are out there, and ZipRecruiter is how you find them. Right now, my listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/fray. That's ZipRecruiter.com/fray. One more time, ZipRecruiter.com/fray. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire.
I'm Jeremy, and you're listening to Into the Fray, where mysterious beings such as hairy cryptids, disembodied spirits, and extraterrestrial visitors are all welcome. Except for spiders. Spiders can go straight back to hell. Now back to the show.
I guess let's start with Vanessa. So the woman that I mentioned beforehand, everybody that had been on the documentary and was also in the documentary from the trial footage was Vanessa Gay. And
Right.
Vanessa was a crack cocaine addict, and that is a broad stroke against, for all of these women at that time. He saw that as a weakness, and he preyed upon a certain kind of woman, and he said, hey, come back to my house, let's drink, we can find some drugs. It seemed to be that was his MO, to get these women back to his house, and it did work, unfortunately, a lot of the time. One thing that Vanessa said that was tough to watch is it was when she was talking to you in your interview, and she said that her family had confronted her on her front porch at one point. And this is before she had unfortunately met Anthony. And her little girl kind of said something along the lines of please, you have to stop. I think it was her daughter's like 9 or 10, so not a super young child, yeah. And that she couldn't do it. She walked away and did what she usually does, being gone for a few days or whatever. And it was hard to watch her kind of say, I couldn't even get clean for my kids, and in the kind of the dark depths that a drug like that just takes you to is, you've really captured that. Can I just say, yeah. So if we could just talk about Vanessa and her meeting Anthony and what he ended up doing to her.
Boy, you want me to describe what happened, or just?
Maybe just broad strokes. You don't have to relive the whole thing again, but that way.
Watch the film.
But
essentially, he lured her into the house, and with the promise of crack cocaine, and also with, you mentioned how he seemed unthreatening. And she describes how she was out on the street really with nowhere to go and kind of needed to get high. And she heard him talking on his cell phone about how it's his birthday and there's nobody to celebrate his birthday. But it turns out he did all that just designed for her to hear. It wasn't like she just happened to pick up the conversation, because as it turns out that wasn't even his birthday.
Oh God.
So he did that just to kind of lure her in, and she got to the house, and again, she even smelled something in the house but ignored it, and but to make a long story short, he basically just brutally attacked and raped her, kept her captive there all night.
Yeah, and you guys have to see the documentary and see the person that went through this talking about it. But another tidbit, and I'm not going to give away everything from the documentary because it's so good to watch that. What she saw in that house, she actually saw one of the decomposing bodies, and there was no other way to explain what she was looking at, and she managed to keep it together, which that's beyond a bravo to her. I don't even know the word to keep that together after. Then you really realize, after already being brutally beaten and raped, you're already in a lot of trouble. And then there's a dead body just laying in another room.
Yeah.
And Anthony would actually keep the bodies out in the open and barely cover them. They would just, or, bury them in the backyard. There was, trying to remember the numbers, 5 in the backyard, like a couple in the basement, and then another 3 or 4, I think, up on
the head. In the bucket.
Oh, right, the head in the bucket. Oh, I forgot about that.
What she saw was the headless body that
right.
never been found. That made it even worse. I mean,
yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, she had to keep it together, act like she hadn't seen anything, and just act like what he did to her was no big deal, and it's just unthinkable. But I mean, that seems to be the common element in the women that I interviewed, is that they just kind of managed to, if they didn't jump out a window, they managed to talk their way out and act as if, nothing happened.
Yeah, and can I just say it was so interesting to see that footage. I'm not going to touch much on that because people have got to see that, because that is something that has been talked about in this case before, is the fact that one of the women, Sean Morris, actually dove out a second-story window. I didn't know there was footage of that. That was incredible to see. Just to let everybody know how crazy Anthony could be. He actually didn't know this until I watched your documentary. He actually rode in the ambulance with that gal, and the nurse said something along the lines, "Oh, your husband rode in the ambulance with you," because she was like, "Oh, I need to call my husband." The nurse is like, "Oh, you don't need to. He's already here. He rode with you." She's like, "That's not my husband." I mean, what in the world? That's some special stuff right there for him to be that brazen.
Yeah, and that's how he was able to get away with this kind of behavior for so long. People didn't really question, why a woman was jumping from his house or running naked or bleeding from his house. It was, no one questioned him going into the ambulance. I mean, it's, so.
The story of the young lady who she actually got out of the house, and she was either not clothed at all or only partially clothed, but she had been beaten. She was bleeding pretty badly, and she had walked up to a pizza place or something, and the people were just laughing at her. I mean, your heart just breaks to hear that.
Yeah, that's almost like a nightmare within a nightmare. I mean, here this woman escapes from the house, she's bleeding, runs across the street to a store to, have them call the police, and they say, "Yeah, get out, you're bleeding," and they're laughing at it. And then there was actually a lot more to the story that I didn't put in there, but apparently Sowell actually came out and acted as if she had stolen money from him. And they believed him. And then she had to keep running down the street, and then finally a cop car appeared, and they actually, did the right thing. They went, they collected evidence, they brought her to the hospital. So a lot of the people along the way actually did do the right thing. And then, after all of this, the assistant prosecutor decided that she was not a credible witness because, of course, like many of the women, she had a criminal history, and they dismissed her case, saying that she was, for lack of evidence, she wasn't credible. And the most horrible thing, I would say that's probably the most horrible part of this story, is that after that happened, where here's someone, because a lot of the women were afraid to go to the police, or they wouldn't tell the police because of their histories. Well, and she had the courage to do that. After all that, 6 more women were killed, and including Vanessa and several other women being attacked by Sowell.
Yeah.
So that's probably the saddest, most horrific part of the story.
think in one of the cases he did the beating, the raping. He loved to bound the women and choke them. And in one of the cases that the women got out, it wasn't he found a shirt for her. God knows where he found it. We can only guess. And then he kind of acted like, hey, well, did you want to come back later tonight or tomorrow? And he had just raped her and beat her within an inch of her life. And he's actually asking her if she wanted to come back and hang out.
Yeah, but that, I think, was actually, you're speaking of Latundra Billups, who, again, she cleverly, she almost died. I mean, she blacked out. And again, when she woke up, he was shocked to see her alive. But basically, that, I would say, was her manipulating him to, again, act as if, she had no idea what happened, no problem. She acted like she was just mad that he had ripped her shirt that her mother had given her.
Oh, right, yeah.
So yeah. So, I mean, again, that's how she got out, acting as if she was more angry about her T-shirt being ripped.
It's a smart lady right there. Mm-hmm. You mentioned how along the way there were people that did things right, but there was, of course, as also mentioned, a lot of things that were done wrong. I think that Latundra was the one that she reported it, but they didn't even contact her until a few weeks later.
Yeah, I mean, there are conflicting reports, of course, if you talk to some of the police, which I don't in my documentary, but Robert does in his book. They'll say, well, we tried, we couldn't get a hold of her. But as she points out, her mother's phone number was always the same, and in fact, that's how I got a hold of her. And so, yeah, it took several weeks for them to follow up, and according to her, she went, she reported it, she, got tested, she waited. I mean, she did all the right things, and they just said, well, we can't just arrest him, we have to prosecute, and it just took several weeks. So but then finally when they did show up to arrest him, that's when they discovered the bodies. But that almost didn't happen.
Yeah, a lot of drop balls.
She had not, and then she had to wait for hours in the hospital to get tested. And here's a woman who's addicted to drugs. What if she hadn't?
Right.
What if she hadn't done all these things? He might still be killing people today.
Yeah, absolutely. And considering his various methods of disposal, burial, I mean, disposal is, I guess, the best way to describe it, because he killed them. He didn't care about them. And then the way he got rid of them was, usually serial killers have a very specific way they like to do things, but he kind of just was all over the place with how he disposed of these poor ladies. Let's talk a little bit about Ray's sausage. So,
okay.
Right next door to Anthony Sowell's house was Ray's sausage. And this poor guy had to spend thousands of dollars to change up like ventilation systems and this and that because of this horrible smell in the neighborhood. But it wasn't coming from Ray's sausage at all. Right.
Yeah, I mean, if all ironies, it should happen that Sowell lives right next door to this, I guess they call it a meat processing place. But yeah, I mean, in retrospect, it seems everyone should have known, something terrible was going on. But, the health department was called out, and I guess it sort of stretches credulity that there'd be dead bodies. I mean, it's
right.
Maybe to say in retrospect, we should have known, but
right.
It did seem like the obvious place where there'd be a bad, odor. So yeah, they had to completely redo, all the pipes and replace, sewage system. I mean, just they spent close to $30,000.
Oh gosh.
Upgrading their place, and then here they are, and she said after all of this, she's standing there and she can smell the smell. I mean, it was just driving them crazy. And they would wash everything down with bleach. They would just so yeah, and then it was hard to tell also exactly where it was coming from, because it sort of depended which way the wind was blowing. And some people thought it came from the corner store owner, and he was an Arab guy, and he said, they'd say, "Oh, you dirty Arab, it must be coming from your store." And so yeah.
I can, being up in the Cleveland area for a couple of years during the summer and how hot and humid it gets, and some of these houses, the older ones don't really have like central AC and such. I can only imagine the smell coming from that place with the bodies just laying out like they were in, I think it was, most of the bodies were on the third floor, I think. Is that right? Or they were, I mean, the ones that were out in the open.
No, the outside, I'm sure that there was an odor coming from the ones outside as well. And
oh, he didn't even really bury them that deep, did he? The ones in the backyard.
No, he got sloppier and sloppier. But I have to say, even after they were discovered, I kind of, as I said, I was trying to kind of convince myself not to do a film, so I didn't really show up until about 10 days after the bodies were discovered. Removed, but I could not get the smell out of my nostrils.
Oh my gosh!
Out of my clothing. I mean, I'd come home and I could smell this, and I don't know if you've ever smelled death before, but it's not really what you think. It almost has this kind of sickeningly sweet smell. It's hard to describe, but it's maybe not what you'd expect, and even though I knew what it was, I kept making up reasons as to what the smell was. Like, oh, well, that must be a dead animal or some rotting vegetables. I mean, I make it up in my head because you're just not programmed to make that association.
Speaking of Assad, Taya, he was across the street from Anthony, right? Ray's was next door, and then Imperial Beverage, which Assad owned, was across the street. And when he said, and this, honestly, what he said, it kind of goes for most of the law enforcement, it seems, that was attached to this case, or could have been attached a lot sooner and stopped women from dying, is that Assad said that Anthony... he was just cleaning up the garbage, and he was referring to the women that Anthony killed, and that just really took me aback. I wasn't expecting him to say that.
Yeah, that was a shock, and of course they debated about whether it should be in the film or not, but to me, he was expressing something that a lot of people thought, think, that would kind of know better not to say out loud, or to say, there were a lot of comments like that actually in this anonymous sections in the paper, where people comment talking about the women as garbage, and they were treated, to be honest, that way even before they were killed, because of who they were as drug addicts. And so, even just the word crackhead, that's like calling someone a thing, and it. So yeah, people are very shocked, but I think you have to be careful not to judge yourself, I'm way above that. I mean, we've all experienced driving past somebody, walking past somebody, looking the other way. I mean, I'm sure I still do that. So yeah, and again, I think that the police had some of them, not all of them, but had that attitude as well. Kind of, well, we won't take this seriously because she's just a drug addict, or not even taking the people in that neighborhood as seriously because oh, well, this is just a high crime area where stuff like this happens. So yeah, I would say that attitude of kind of objectifying the women or thinking them garbage kind of pervaded all levels of society. And it's kind of the point I'm trying to make in my film.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, this bad guy on the corner. And in fact, I think you almost have to give him a little more credit because he actually worked in the neighborhood, and his brother was killed by a drug dealer, and
right.
And it's easy to say from your nice little middle class perch, oh, I would never behave that way, or I would never say such a thing. But if you actually lived in a neighborhood like that and dealt with things on a day-to-day basis, I think that would probably change you as a person.
No, and I agree with you that it was brave of him just to say what he was thinking, and how you were mentioning how people were commenting online, but probably very anonymously under some kind of a pseudo name, right? He actually was just saying what a lot of people thought about those women. So, yeah.
I don't know if I'd call him brave. Maybe just someone who doesn't know any better. And also, there's cultural differences.
Right.
I'd say he comes from more of kind of a misogynistic background, making some generalities, but it's probably true where women are already, thought of as lesser.
Yeah, the fact that also, I don't know if I remember this from Robert's book or not, but that Assad and one of his sons, I think, actually came across a garbage bag that smelled to high heaven and in his dumpster. And I don't think they ever opened it to see what it was, but we could guess.
It was someone that worked for him. And we'll never know whether someone putting a dead animal in there, but it does make you wonder. But then again, I'm thinking, well, why would Sowell, who's so lazy, why would he walk across the street?
Right.
Put a body in a dumpster, so...
Yeah, when he's already have heads in buckets and half-naked, decomposing bodies just laying in the open in his own house. I cannot imagine the smell. And, I mean, he would leave the house and go back to the house. It's not like he was in it 24/7, so how did he live in there? It's a whole nother species of human right there. The pastor that you interviewed is so interesting because of one thing that he said, and he said that they used to stop there and pray at the corner of 123rd and Imperial Avenue. Yeah. And he didn't know why, but he said we'd go out on our little, just to go out and talk to people and spread the word. And they'd always stop there. And he was always driven to stop there. That was interesting.
Yeah. I mean, this pastor, again, he had a church right in the neighborhood. But as with many neighborhoods, a lot of the people that go to his church had left for the outer ring suburbs. They'd left because the neighborhood was poor, but they would still come back to the Imperial area to go to church. And so I guess he was making some kind of effort to do a little outreach, as you might call it, in the neighborhood, to get some of the actual neighbors to come to the church, or some of the women that were on drugs or drinking. So they would come to that area. And I guess at one point they felt somehow pulled to that corner. So, but that's something I think you got to kind of watch in the film, hear him say.
Oh no, it's really powerful, and I just thought it was a cool people that just, I don't know, they just get a feeling about a place, and they just know they need to go there, and maybe they can't do anything, but darn it, they're gonna try. They don't know why they're gonna try, but they're gonna try. Well, let's talk about...
There's also an interesting... Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
There's an interesting contrast between that, because when Vanessa's escaping from the house, she talks about how there were all these church people, and they looked the other way, when she was limping and needed help. So So there's kind of a contradiction there. And even the pastor himself feels that he could have done more for those people.
Mm. Yeah, that whole aspect of, it's like over and over, they actually get out of the house and escape death. Literally, they escape death, and they just get laughed at, and nobody will help them. Mm-hmm. That's horrible. So the house being torn down in 2011, Vanessa herself, was she the only one that came of the survivors there to watch that come down?
I'm pretty sure there were some family members, maybe. But yeah, she, I mean, at first she wasn't sure she wanted to go there, but she did. Yeah, and as you can tell, it's a really emotional experience for her.
Mm-hmm. Is that still a vacant lot to this day?
Yes, it is. There's been a lot of talk about, creating a memorial, and some money was raised, but it's strange. I mean, and they put up some flowers and some things, but then, quickly get, ironically, covered with garbage and litter. So it's almost worse in a way.
Right.
So, and then there's some dispute over how the memorial should be made. And there were some people that really didn't want it in the first place. I mean, Vanessa was talking to me about it. That, again, that's not in the film, but she was just saying, well, I wouldn't go there and sit.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's been kind of a controversial thing, which may or may not ever get resolved. And yeah, in the meantime, there's just this empty space there.
Do they still have a fence up around there? Because is there people that kind of come and, the whole looky-loo and the serial killer, what do they call them? Like groupies, basically. Is there a lot of activity around there centered around that plot of land?
No, there hasn't been. I mean, before the house was torn down, it was guarded and fenced.
Yeah.
It was guarded 24 hours. But now it's just, people throw stuff. Yeah. So the reality.
Yeah, right. Well, and I would suppose that, being blunt, that's probably still not a very good part of town, right, of Cleveland?
No, it's even gotten worse in a way. It's because when I was there filming, it seemed like at least, there was this sort of little community. There was the corner store, and, now, more houses have been torn down. The corner store burned down. I don't know if that was by design or not. The sausage place, they couldn't, I believe, I have to check for sure, but I think they are either moving out or have moved or closed down because they just couldn't make it financially. And yeah, more houses boarded up, and in some places just the, brush and grass have grown. There's weeds all over the place. So it almost looks like sort of apocalyptic, like, nature is taken over. So it's, yeah.
I guess in a way it is. I mean, can a neighborhood get over something like that, right? When it was already so dark beforehand because of all the drugs and probably bad things going on beforehand. Gosh.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. On the other side of things, some good schools have opened. There's a little garden place. People are always trying new things, new projects, and this is a problem not just in this area, but in many poor areas in Cleveland. It just happens to be where there was a serial killing.
So Mr. Anthony Sowell is in, I hope I say this right, Chillicothe, Ohio. Is he still down there?
I believe so. Again, I'm not the expert, and I thought he would appeal and probably just die in prison because he isn't on death row. But I think he has exhausted his last appeal, so it is possible he could be put to death in prison.
I wonder when the last time Ohio actually put someone to death. I should have looked that up before we hopped on. I'm sorry. I Just wondering. It seems like a lot of these guys, they get sentenced to death, but it's never really the quote-unquote system that actually takes them out. It's just old age, like you said, just languishing away and appealing, and they end up dying of old age or some other natural thing.
In different states, I believe the appeal process is different, and I know here you can appeal, and I mean that's I suppose one argument against, despite whatever your morals are about, or about the death penalty, it is really expensive, costs taxpayers a lot of money because of all these legal appeals. And the trial itself, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I just wonder what's going to happen with Mr. Anthony Sowell in the next few years, if he has exhausted those appeals, if they're actually going to go forward with the verdict that they came through with the death penalty for him.
Right.
So where can people see Unseen?
Well, that is... you can see it on video on demand platforms right now. So that would be iTunes or Amazon or Google Play or Vudu. And you can get to all those links and get more information about the film on the website, which is simply unseendocumentary.com. Maybe you can put that on your website, too.
Absolutely, yeah. unseendocumentary.com. And I will try to link as many of those on-demand outlets as I can as well.
Actually on iTunes, it was in the top 10 for a while.
Nice.
People can watch it on iTunes. It got to be up to number 2. So
congratulations. There's a lot of content on iTunes. Congrats, Laura.
Yeah.
So, guys, one thing I want to mention about Unseen is the fact that Laura and I discussed only a couple of the cases that are covered in the documentary, and Laura was actually able to talk to family members and, brothers and sisters and boyfriends, husbands of some of these victims, as well as some of the survivors. So what we talked about today is only a tidbit of what is covered. So I just want to make sure to mention that.
Thank you.
Well, so what's next for you, Laura? Are you going to work on any more documentaries?
Yes, and they often start the way this one did, where I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do, but I'm doing a documentary that takes place in southern Ohio, where there's an unsolved massacre, family of 8. So I'm presently kind of approaching it more as a portrait of this town where there is this unsolved murder. So it's in very early stages, so maybe in a few years it'll be done and we'll be talking about it.
Well, you are welcome to come back on.
Okay, well, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so-and-so. I was given this name by my parents. I've been to such and such a college. I've done these things in my profession. I produce a little biography. Buddha says, forget it. That's not true. That's some story. That's all gone. That's all past. I want to see the real you are now. Well, nobody knows who that is. Because we don't know ourselves except through listening to our echoes and consulting our memories. But then there's a real you, and that again leads us back to this question. Who are you? That is the real you. We shall see how they play with this exam by the koans to get you to come out of your shell and find out who you really are. divided on this. They will say, no, we don't believe literally in reincarnation. That after your funeral, you will suddenly become somebody different, living somewhere else. They will say reincarnation means this, that if you sitting here now are really convinced that you're the same person who walked in the door half an hour ago, you're being reincarnated. If you are liberated, you understand that you're not. The past doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. There is only the present. That's the only real you that there is. The Zen master told you in this way. He said, spring does not become the summer. First there is summer, and then there is spring. When you settle down in the train to read your newspaper and so on, you are not the same person who a little while ago left the platform. If you think you are linking your moments up in a chain. And this is what binds you to the wheel of birth and death. But when you know that every moment in which you are is the only moment, this comes into Zen. The master will say to somebody, get up and walk across the room. And he comes back and he says, where are your footprints? They've gone. So where are you? Who are you? When we are asked who we are, we usually give a kind of recitation of a history.